Hello, welcome back to 40 Days with the Fathers. Today is day 6 and we're on another letter from Ignatius to a church. It's a letter to the Magnesians. So this is a letter to the church in Magnesia, which is in Greece. He encourages them to continue in unity, honour their leadership, avoid Judaizers who might try and bring false teaching, and it also gives some valuable insight to early church hierarchy. And it was written in that same period, 107 to 108 AD, while it was en route to Rome to be eaten by wild animals. Lovely. Today he continues with Ignatius' next letter, which he wrote on his travels through Asia Minor towards his martyrdom. His letter goes to the Magnesian church, which is highly commended for their faith. There is definitely a strong theme with regards to the structure of the church leadership and how the believers should trust and follow their bishops, similar to Ignatius' other letters, but now it begins to make more sense in this letter, as his thinking on the matter is displayed more clearly. He urges the church to submit to their bishop because in doing so, they are in fact submitting to the Father, who is the bishop of us all, as he says. The opening chapters of this letter reminded me of Paul when he wrote to Timothy to encourage him in his position within the church, despite his youth. That's 1 Timothy 4, verse 12, if you're interested. In a similar manner, Ignatius is advising this church in Magnesia not to become too familiar with their bishop on account of his youth, as he says, but to remember his position as a leader of the church, and so to yield to him with all reverence. Chapter 6 actually gives us a really good insight into the theology behind church hierarchy, why Ignatius is emphasising obeying the bishop and presbyters so much. They're essentially the representation of God and the apostles to the congregation. Let's have a look at how Ignatius puts it. To quote, "Presbyters in the place of the assembly of the apostles, along with your deacons, who are most dear to me and entrusted with the ministry of Jesus Christ." Oh, I missed a line. "Your bishop presides in the place of God, and your presbyters in the place of the assembly of the apostles, along with the deacons, who are most dear to me and entrusted with the ministry of Jesus Christ." So, yeah, bishop is like God, elders, deacons, presbyters, however you translate it, is like the apostles in their ministry towards people, taking on the message from the Father or the bishop. So there's some high standards to live up to for the leaders. It's no wonder the qualifications for these positions were strict if this was the thinking behind them. Maybe this was thought even when Paul first penned his letters to Timothy and Titus about the leadership qualifications. Might never know, but with Ignatius' close link to the Apostle John and everything like that, there's potential for why this thinking and theology behind church hierarchy exists this early on. I don't suppose Ignatius just made up this whole thing. He might have done, but I'm guessing there was some sort of tradition behind it that's possibly come from Paul and the other apostles, but it's speculation. Lost my place now. Yeah, so it's also because of this understanding that Ignatius instructs his congregation not to do anything without the bishop or presbyters, since as Jesus did nothing without the Father, and the apostles without Jesus, so neither should the church without their leadership. It's interesting to see that this church structure was active from so early on, and not something created hundreds of years after the fact, which is sometimes a common idea that all of this sort of structure and hierarchy and priests and bishops, etc., only came about in the Middle Ages or something, when the Roman Catholics sort of, corrupted everything and whatever the myths go like. The final chapters warn against strange doctrines and old fables, which mainly seem to be about Judaizers who would teach the new believers to follow the old ways of Judaism, This would be another early example of the views of the church in regards to the Jewish law and how it relates to Christians. For if we live still according to the Jewish law, Ignatius says, we acknowledge that we have not received grace, which you can see is a statement echoing Paul's sentiments throughout his letters to the churches. Like he says, you're not under law but under grace, as he wrote in Romans 6 verse 14. This whole chapter is pretty much a short summary of Paul's teachings on the law and how we Christians are no longer bound by it. You who want to be justified by the law have cut yourself off from Christ. You have fallen away from grace, as Paul wrote. Or as Ignatius phrases it, it is absurd to profess Christ Jesus and to Judaize. The message is consistent. Christians are no longer under the law of Moses, but have come to the possession of a new hope, no longer observing the Sabbath, but living the observance of the Lord's day, as Ignatius says. An encouraging letter to read, offering some valuable insight into the early church and their understanding of our relation of the law as Christians. So I recommend you read it in full, because if you ever had questions about our relationship to the old law as Christians, as Ignatius gives some nice little insights there and ties it back, or definitely echoes Paul's sentiments for his letters. Anyway, it's the end of this one. If you're enjoying it, you can buy the book, and the links are all below in the description. And if you are liking these, enjoying it, please consider donating and subscribing via Patreon, where you can donate one-off or regular monthly amounts, and you will get some freebies in return, like free books, etc. So, bye.